The Velthari had not lost a war in 3,000 years. This was not a boast. It was simply a fact. Like the color of their sky or the number of moons around their homeworld, war, to the Velthari, was a science that they had perfected long before most species in the galaxy had learned to make fire. Supreme Admiral Nethys stood in the Hall of Eternal Victory, surrounded by holographic displays of every major battle her people had ever fought. 10,000 conflicts, 10,000 victories. The blue light of the displays reflected off her silver skin as she walked slowly past images of burning enemy fleets and conquered worlds. Each victory had been calculated, predicted, and executed with mathematical precision. The Velthari did not believe in luck. They believed in numbers, in patterns, in the absolute certainty that superior tactics would always defeat inferior opponents. The Galactic Concord, the great alliance that ruled most of known space, existed because of Velthari military power. Other species joined the Concord willingly because the alternative was to face the Velthari fleet. No one chose the alternative. Not anymore. Not for the last 2,000 years. Nethys stopped before the most recent addition to the hall, a small display showing the conquest of the Morthani Empire just 50 years ago. The Morthani had been proud warriors who believed their honor would carry them to victory. They had been wrong. Nethys remembered the battle well. She had commanded the fleet herself. The Morthani fought bravely, but bravery was just another variable in the equation, and the equation always favored the Velthari. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Ambassador Kethvoran entering the hall, his ceremonial robes flowing behind him. Kethvoran was old even by Velthari standards, his silver skin showing the darker patches that came with advanced age. He had served the Dominion for 400 years, convincing dozens of species to join the Concord peacefully. When diplomacy failed, the fleet arrived. Kethvoran preferred diplomacy. It was cleaner. "Supreme Admiral," he said, bowing his head slightly, "I have news from the exploration fleet." Nethys raised one eyebrow. "Another species discovered?" "Yes. On the outer rim, beyond the Kepler boundary. They call themselves humans." "Humans." Nethys tasted the word. It felt strange on her tongue. "What do we know of them?" Kethvoran activated a small holographic display from his wrist device. An image appeared showing a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. They evolved on a world called Earth. Apparently, they only achieved faster than light travel approximately 200 years ago. They have colonized perhaps 30 worlds in their local region. 200 years? Nethys almost laughed. They are infants. Indeed. Their technology is crude by our standards. Their ships are inefficient. Their weapons are primitive. And they seem to have no unified government. Our scouts report that they actually have multiple competing nations. Even now. Nethys shook her head in disbelief. They fight among themselves? Even after reaching the stars? It appears so. They have a long history of internal conflict. Our analysts believe they may be naturally aggressive, but their aggression is unfocused, turned inward rather than outward, primitive and divided. Nethys turned back to the displays of Velthari victories. "They will be easy to bring into the Concord. That is why I have come," Kethvoran said. "The High Council wishes me to make contact, to deliver the invitation." Nethys nodded. The invitation was always the same. Join the Concord, accept Velthari protection, pay tribute, and live in peace. Refuse, and face the consequences. No species had refused in over 1,000 years. The mathematics were too obvious. Why fight a war you could not win? "Go," Nethys said. "Bring them into the fold. If they resist, send word. I will dispatch a fleet." Kethvoran bowed again. "I expect this will be a simple matter. A species this young will surely see reason." He left the hall, and Nethys returned to her contemplation of past victories. She did not think about the humans again. They were too small, too weak, too insignificant to occupy her thoughts. In 3,000 years, she had seen dozens of young species join the Concord. They always joined eventually. The mathematics demanded it. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Kethvoran's ship emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. He was greeted by a small patrol vessel that escorted him to a space station orbiting the 4th planet of the human home system. The station was ugly by Velthari standards, all sharp angles and exposed metal, lacking the elegant curves that marked proper civilization. Keth Voran tried not to let his disgust show on his face. The human delegation met him in a conference room with large windows overlooking the planet below. There were 5 of them, 3 males and 2 females, all dressed in simple, dark clothing. They were strange-looking creatures, Keth Voran thought. Soft skin in various shades of brown and pink, hair on their heads like some kind of primitive covering, 2 eyes, like most species, but these eyes seemed oddly intense, always moving, always watching. The leader of the delegation introduced herself as Secretary General Amara Okonkwo. She was tall for a human, with dark skin and gray hair that suggested advanced age. She smiled warmly as she shook Keth Voran's hand, a strange greeting custom that he had been briefed about. "Welcome to human space, Ambassador," she said. "We are honored by your visit." Keth Voran allowed himself a small smile. They were being polite. That was good. Polite species were easier to deal with. "I bring greetings from the Galactic Concord," he said, launching into the speech he had given hundreds of times before. "The Concord represents the greatest alliance of civilizations in the known galaxy. We offer peace, prosperity, and protection to all species who join our great community." The humans listened quietly. They did not interrupt. They did not ask questions. They simply watched him with those intense eyes. When he finished explaining the terms of membership, including the tribute payments and the requirement to accept Velthari military authority, Secretary General Okonkwo nodded thoughtfully. "We appreciate the offer," she said. "We truly do. But I am afraid we must decline." Keth Voran blinked. He was not sure he had heard correctly. Decline? Yes. Humanity values its independence. We have fought too long and too hard to govern ourselves to simply hand over our sovereignty to another power, no matter how benevolent. "You misunderstand," Keth Voran said, keeping his voice calm. "This is not a request. The Concord does not make requests. We make offers. Offers that wise species accept. And we are grateful for the offer." Okonkwo replied, still smiling. "But our answer is no." Keth Voran felt his 2 hearts beating faster. This was not how the conversation was supposed to go. He decided to be more direct. "Perhaps you do not understand your position. The Velthari Dominion has conquered every species that has refused to join the conquered. Our military power is absolute. We have not lost a war in 3,000 years. Your species is young. Your technology is limited, and you are divided among yourselves. You cannot hope to resist us." The humans exchanged glances. Something passed between them that Keth Voran could not read. Then Okonkwo leaned forward slightly. "Ambassador, we understand our position perfectly. We know how powerful the Velthari are. We have studied your history, your tactics, your weapons. We know exactly what we would face if we chose to fight. Then why refuse?" Okonkwo's smile changed. It was still polite, but there was something else behind it now. Something hard. "Because we have also studied our own history, and we know something about ourselves that you do not yet understand." "And what is that?" "We do not surrender. We do not submit. It is not in our nature. You can destroy us, but you cannot conquer us. And the cost of destroying us will be higher than you can imagine." Keth Voran stood in silence for a long moment. He had dealt with proud species before. The Morthani had been proud. The Colossians had been proud. Pride was meaningless against Velthari mathematics. "I will deliver your response to the High Council," he said finally. "I hope you will reconsider before it is too late." "We will not reconsider," Okonkwo said. "But Ambassador, I want you to remember something. When your ships come, and we know they will come, remember that we gave you a choice. Remember that you could have simply left us alone." Keth Voran turned and walked out of the conference room. As he returned to his ship, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. He tried to identify it and realized with surprise that it was uncertainty. He pushed the feeling aside. The humans were fools. They would learn their mistakes soon enough. 2 weeks after Keth Voran delivered his report to the High Council, Supreme Admiral Nethys dispatched a punishment fleet, 40 warships under the command of Fleet Commander Zavros, one of her most experienced officers. It was an overwhelming force, far more than necessary to defeat a primitive species with only 2 centuries of spacefaring experience. Nethys expected the campaign to last 3 days, 4 at most. As the fleet departed for human space, she returned to the Hall of Eternal Victory. Soon there would be a new display, showing the conquest of humanity. Another victory to add to the collection. Another proof of Velthari supremacy. She did not know that she was about to learn a lesson that her people had forgotten long ago. She did not know that there was a difference between a species that had mastered war and a species that had been forged by it. The humans were waiting. They had been waiting for a very long time, and they remembered everything. Fleet Commander Zavros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Certainty, watching the stars blur past as his fleet traveled through faster-than-light space. 40 warships moved in perfect formation behind him, each one a masterpiece of Velthari engineering, each one crewed by officers who had trained their entire lives for this exact purpose. Zavros had commanded punishment fleets before. He knew how these campaigns went. The target species would see the size of his fleet and immediately open negotiations. If they were foolish enough to fight, their primitive weapons would bounce harmlessly off Velthari's shields, while his ships systematically destroyed them. It was not war, it was mathematics, and mathematics always gave the same answer. His tactical officer, a young female named Selith, approached with a datapad. "Commander, we will arrive at the Kepler boundary in 6 hours. Our scouts report human vessels gathering at the edge of their space." "How many?" 12 ships, Commander." Zavros allowed himself a rare smile. 12 ships against 40. They are either brave or stupid. Scouts indicate their vessels are smaller than ours. Weapon systems appear to be chemical-based projectiles and simple energy beams. Their shields are primitive compared to our own. As expected. Zavros waved his hand dismissively. "Have the fleet prepare for combat, but do not expect much resistance. This will be over quickly." 6 hours later, the Velthari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the Kepler boundary. The stars returned to normal, sharp points of light against the black void. And there, arranged in a rough line between the Velthari and human space, were 12 human warships. Zavros studied them on his display screen. The human ships were ugly, just like the station Kethvaran had described. Blocky, angular things covered in antenna arrays and weapons turrets. They looked like they had been designed by committee, with no sense of aesthetic beauty or mathematical elegance. Their largest vessel was perhaps half the size of his flagship. "Open a communication channel," Zavros ordered. The main screen flickered, and a human face appeared. A female with dark hair pulled back tightly from her face. She wore a simple gray uniform with a few small decorations on the chest. Her expression was completely calm, almost bored. "I am Admiral Chen of the United Earth Navy," she said. "You are entering human space without permission. Turn your fleet around and leave, or we will consider this an act of war." Zavros leaned back in his command chair. "I am Fleet Commander Zavros of the Velthari Dominion. Your species has refused to join the Galactic Concord. I am here to correct that mistake. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with mercy. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Admiral Chen looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. "Commander, I am going to give you one chance. One chance to save your fleet and your crew. Turn around. Go home. Tell your leaders that humanity is not interested in joining their concord. Tell them to leave us alone." "You threaten me?" Zavros felt his 2 hearts beat with anger. "You have 12 ships. I have 40. Your technology is 2,000 years behind ours. What possible threat could you pose?" "The threat that we will fight." Chen's smile disappeared. "And once we start fighting, we do not stop. Ever. For any reason. Until we win, or we die. Then you will die. Probably. But so will many of your people. Is that worth it? To conquer one small species on the edge of the galaxy?" Zavros cut the communication channel. He turned to Selith. "All ships, attack formation. Destroy them." The Velthari fleet spread out into a perfect crescent formation, each ship taking its mathematically optimal position. This was the formation that had crushed the Morthani, broken the Colassians, and ended 100 other species' dreams of independence. It was beautiful in its precision. The human ships did not move. They simply sat there, waiting. Zavros watched as his tactical display calculated 17 different victory scenarios. The fastest predicted complete human destruction in 37 minutes. The slowest, accounting for unexpected variables, suggested 2 hours. All 17 scenarios ended the same way. Total Velthari victory. Fire at will, Zavros commanded. The Velthari ships opened fire. Bright beams of energy lanced across space toward the human vessels. The mathematics said that 13% of shots would miss, 62% would hit shields, and 25% would penetrate to cause hull damage. By the fourth volley, at least 3 human ships should be disabled or destroyed. The first volley hit the human shields and something strange happened. The shields flickered wildly, absorbing far more energy than they should have been able to hold. The humans had done something to their shield generators, pushed them beyond their design limits in ways that made no mathematical sense. It was inefficient. It was dangerous. It was working. Then the human ships did something that made Zavros's blood run cold. They charged. 12 human vessels accelerated directly toward the Velthari fleet, ignoring all tactical doctrine. In proper fleet combat, you maintained distance. You used superior positioning. You let mathematics guide your movements. You did not charge headfirst into an enemy formation that outnumbered you more than 3-1. The humans apparently did not know this. Their ships screamed forward at acceleration rates that should have killed their crews. They fired as they came, their primitive weapons filling space with projectiles and energy beams. The attacks were not coordinated. They were not elegant. They were simply constant, overwhelming, and absolutely fearless. A Velthari cruiser on the flank exploded as 4 human ships concentrated their fire on it. The cruiser's shields held for exactly 8 seconds before collapsing. The hull lasted another 3 seconds before the ship broke apart. Impossible, Seleth whispered. Zavros gripped the arms of his command chair. Regroup. Target the lead human vessel. But the human ships were already among them, weaving between Velthari cruisers at speeds that made targeting almost impossible. They fought like wild animals, with no pattern, no formation, no predictable behavior. Every time Zavros's tactical computer calculated their next move, they did something different. A human destroyer, already damaged and trailing atmosphere from a hull breach, turned suddenly and rammed a Velthari cruiser. The destroyer exploded on impact, but it took the cruiser with it. 2 ships destroyed, 1 from each side. But the humans had far fewer ships to lose. They are insane, Seleth said, her voice shaking. They are losing, Zavros replied. But his voice lacked conviction. The battle continued for 2 hours. 2 hours of chaos, of fire, of ships dying in the cold void of space. The Velthari lost ship after ship, each loss impossible according to the mathematics that should have governed the battle. Human ships took damage that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. Human crews stayed at their posts in burning vessels until the very end. Finally, Zavros saw the truth his tactical computer refused to show him. He was losing, not just the battle, but any hope of victory. He had lost 18 ships. The humans had lost 6, and the 6 remaining human vessels showed no signs of stopping. All ships, retreat, he ordered. The words tasted like poison. The Velthari fleet turned and ran. As they accelerated toward the safety of faster-than-light travel, Zavros watched the human ships on his display. They held formation at the Kepler boundary. They did not pursue. A communication request appeared on his screen. He accepted it, and Admiral Chen's face appeared again. She looked tired, bruised, with a cut on her forehead that was still bleeding, but she was smiling. Commander Zavros, we gave you a chance to leave. You chose to fight. You have won nothing, Zavros spat. The Dominion will send more ships, more fleets. We will crush you eventually, maybe. But you will remember this day. You will remember that 12 human ships made 40 Velthari ships run away. She leaned forward slightly. Tell your leaders something for me. Tell them that we do not want their territory. We do not want their tribute. We do not want their concord. We just want to be left alone. And we will fight, and fight, and keep fighting until they understand that. You cannot win a war against the Velthari Dominion. You are probably right, but we can make winning so expensive that you will wish you had never found us. Chen paused. We have been fighting wars since before your species learned to walk upright. We have invented 1,000 ways to kill each other. We have survived plagues, famines, and the splitting of atoms. We do not know how to surrender. We never learned. The communication ended. Zavros watched the human ships grow smaller on his display, until his fleet jumped to faster than light speed and they disappeared entirely. 11 ships. He had started with 40. He was returning with 11. As the stars blurred around him, Zavros thought about what Admiral Chen had said, about humans fighting since before the Velthari could walk, about a species that had never learned to surrender. He had thought the humans were primitives. Now he understood they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, and survivors did not need to win. They just needed to keep fighting until their enemies gave up. For the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Zavros wondered if the Velthari had made a terrible mistake. Supreme Admiral Nethys read the battle report for the 4th time. The words had not changed. The numbers had not changed. But she still could not make them fit inside her understanding of how the universe worked. 40 ships sent. 11 returned. 29 Velthari warships destroyed by 12 human patrol vessels. It was impossible. It defied every principle of military science that her people had developed over 3,000 years. She was standing in the War Council chamber, surrounded by the highest military officers of the Velthari Dominion. They were all silent, staring at the same holographic display showing the battle data. None of them spoke because none of them knew what to say. Finally, a young analyst named Korath stepped forward. He was barely 200 years old, practically a child by Velthari standards, but he had been studying the battle data for 3 days straight without sleep. "Supreme Admiral," he said, his voice uncertain, "I believe I have identified several factors that contributed to our defeat." "Speak," Nethys commanded. Korath activated his own holographic display, showing detailed analysis of the human ships and tactics. First, the human vessels were not built according to any standard we recognize. They have redundant systems everywhere: backup power, backup life support, backup weapons controls. Their ships are at least 30% heavier than they need to be because of these redundancies. "That is inefficient," one of the senior admirals said. "Yes, but it means their ships do not die easily." In the battle, several human vessels continued fighting with damage that would have destroyed any Velthari ship. Their redundancies kept them operational far longer than our calculations predicted. Korath changed the display to show crew quarters on a human ship. Second, look at their living spaces. They are reinforced like bunkers, armor plating around sleeping areas, emergency oxygen supplies at every station, escape pods with their own navigation systems. These ships are designed with the assumption that they will be damaged, boarded, and partially destroyed. They plan for disaster. Why would anyone build a ship expecting to lose? Another admiral asked. Because they expect to survive losing. Their doctrine appears to be based on the idea that the crew matters more than the ship. They will sacrifice vessels to save personnel. They will take damage that costs them the battle if it means their people live to fight again. Nethys frowned. That is tactically unsound. Ships are valuable resources. Ships can be replaced, Supreme Admiral. Experienced crews cannot. Korath hesitated before continuing. There is something else. Something more disturbing. Continue. I have been studying human military history. Our archives contain limited information, but what we have found is concerning. He changed the display again, showing images from human wars throughout history. Humans have been fighting wars among themselves for their entire existence as a species. They have never had a period of peace lasting more than a few decades. Even after they achieved faster-than-light travel, they continued fighting each other. The admirals murmured among themselves. This was unnatural. Most species united before they reached the stars. War was something you evolved past, not something you carried with you into space. Their military doctrines are not based on mathematics or efficiency, Korath explained. They are based on psychology, on morale, on the idea that wars are won by breaking the enemy's will to fight, not just by destroying their forces. That makes no sense, a senior admiral protested. If you destroy an enemy's fleet, they cannot fight. That is simple logic. Human logic is different. They believe that a defeated enemy who still wants to fight will rebuild and attack again. So they do not just try to defeat enemies. They try to make enemies stop wanting to fight at all. Korath paused. And they are willing to pay terrible prices to achieve this. He showed images of human battles. Cities reduced to rubble, nations destroyed, millions of casualties. Humans have fought wars that killed tens of millions of their own people. They have destroyed their own cities rather than surrender them. They have starved, frozen, and died by the hundreds of thousands to hold ground that had no strategic value, simply because giving up was unthinkable. The chamber fell silent. Nethys stared at the images of human devastation. She had seen conquered species before. She had seen resistance and rebellion. But she had never seen anything like this. A species that would destroy itself, rather than accept defeat. "There is more," Korath said quietly. "I analyzed the human ships we destroyed at the Kepler boundary. Based on their design and capabilities, they appear to be patrol vessels, light craft meant for border security and reconnaissance. Patrol vessels?" Nethys's voice was sharp. "They destroyed 29 of our warships with patrol vessels?" "Yes, Supreme Admiral. According to our intelligence, the human battle fleet remains at their homeworld. It has never been deployed." Korath brought up a new display showing estimates of human military strength. "We believe they have several hundred combat-capable ships, perhaps as many as 2,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. "That cannot be correct," someone said. "They have only been a spacefaring species for 2 centuries. They cannot have built that many ships. They can if they never stopped preparing for war. Our estimates suggest humans spend approximately 8% of their total economic output on military development. That is 4 times what any Concord species spends. They have been building warships since the day they achieved faster-than-light travel, and they have never stopped." Nethys walked slowly around the display, studying the images of human ships, human weapons, human history. Everything she saw contradicted everything she knew about how civilizations developed. Species were supposed to become peaceful as they advanced. They were supposed to turn their energies towards science, art, and exploration. They were not supposed to spend centuries preparing for wars that might never come. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do they do this?" Korath shook his head. "I do not know, Supreme Admiral. Perhaps it is instinct. Perhaps it is culture. Perhaps they cannot help themselves." He paused. "There is one more thing I should mention." "What?" "According to their own historical records, humans have a name for themselves. They call their planet a death world. The conditions there are extreme by galactic standards. Extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, natural disasters, diseases. Everything on their planet is trying to kill them, including each other." Korath met Nethys's eyes directly. "They did not evolve to master war, Supreme Admiral. They evolved to survive it. Every generation, for hundreds of thousands of years, the weak died and the strong survived. They are not a young species that has yet to learn the mathematics of war. They are an ancient species that wrote those mathematics in their own blood." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then one of the senior admirals spoke up. "We must attack again. With overwhelming force. Every ship we have. We will crush them before they can respond." Other admirals voiced agreement. It was the obvious answer. The Velthari way. Meet force with greater force. Apply the mathematics until they produced victory. But Nethys held up her hand for silence. "No," she said. "We will not attack. Supreme Admiral, think about what Korath has told us. The humans expected us to send ships. They were ready for us. They planned for disaster and survived it." She looked at the images of human history, the endless wars, the millions dead. "If we send more ships, they will be ready again, and again, and again. They will trade ships and lives for time, and they will never stop. Then what do we do?" Nethys thought about Admiral Chen's message to Zavros, about humans not wanting territory or tribute or membership in the Conquered, about wanting only to be left alone. "I will go to them myself," she said. "Not with a fleet, not with weapons. I will go and ask them a question." "What question?" Nethys turned to face her admirals. "I will ask them what it would take for them to be our allies instead of our enemies. Because if we cannot defeat them, then we must find another way." The admirals stared at her in shock. The Velthari did not ask for alliances. They demanded submission, or they destroyed resistance. That was how things had been done for 3,000 years. But Nethys understood something that her admirals did not. She had looked at the images of human wars, at the ruins of their cities and the graves of their dead. And she had seen something terrifying. She had seen a species that was not afraid to die. And you could not conquer a species that was not afraid to die. You could only destroy them completely, or you could make them your friends. Nethys chose friendship. It was the most logical decision she had ever made. The Velthari diplomatic vessel entered human space alone. No escort, no weapons armed. Just a single ship carrying Supreme Admiral Nethys and a small staff of advisors. It was the most dangerous thing Nethys had ever done, and she had commanded fleets in 100 battles. The humans did not attack. They sent a patrol ship to escort her to Earth, the same type of vessel that had destroyed 29 of her warships. Up close, the human ship looked even uglier than she had imagined. Welded plates and exposed conduits, weapons mounted on every surface. It looked like a vehicle designed by someone who expected to be attacked at any moment. Earth itself was beautiful in a strange way. Blue oceans and green lands and white clouds. It looked peaceful from orbit, but Nethys now knew what that peace had cost. Millions of years of struggle, billions of deaths. A species forged in fire until nothing could break them. She was taken to a building in a city called Geneva. The building was old by human standards, built of stone and glass, surrounded by gardens. Secretary General Okonkwo met her at the entrance, accompanied by Admiral Chen and several other officials. Chen looked different than she had during the battle. She was wearing a formal uniform now, decorated with medals and ribbons. Her face was calm, professional, showing no sign of the warrior who had charged a fleet 3 times her size. But her eyes were the same, watchful, ready. Supreme Admiral Nethys, Okonkwo said, extending her hand in the human greeting. Welcome to Earth. We are surprised to see you here. Nethys took the offered hand carefully. I have come to talk. Only to talk. That is a change from your previous approach. Yes. Nethys felt the weight of 3,000 years of Velthari history pressing down on her. I have learned that some approaches do not work. They led her inside to a conference room. The table was round, Nethys noticed. No head position. No hierarchy. Humans sat as equals when they negotiated. She filed this information away for future reference. For the first hour, they discussed formalities, boundaries, communication channels, the status of prisoners from the battle. The humans were polite but firm. They wanted nothing from the Velthari except to be left alone. Finally, Nethys asked the question she had come to ask. Why do you fight so hard? The human officials looked at each other. It was Admiral Chen who answered. Because we remember. Remember what? Chen stood and walked to a window overlooking the city. Every human child learns history. We learn about our wars, our plagues, our famines. We learn about the times we nearly destroyed ourselves. We learn about the enemies who tried to destroy us and how we survived. She turned back to face Nethys. Your species united before you reached the stars. You became peaceful. You developed your civilization without constant threat of extinction. That is wonderful. That is what we wish we could have done. But you did not. No. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other for food, for land, for ideas. We invented weapons that could destroy cities in a single flash. We created diseases that could wipe out populations. We burned our forests and poisoned our waters, and still we survived. Because the ones who did not survive are not here to tell their stories. Chen sat back down at the table. We remember all of it. The victories and the defeats. The heroes and the monsters. We carry it in our blood, in our bones, in the way we build our ships and train our soldiers. We cannot forget. Because forgetting means dying. Nethys considered this. You said you do not want territory or tribute. What do you want? We want to be safe, Okonkwo said. That is all we have ever wanted. Safety for our children, safety for our future. We build warships because we remember what happens to species that cannot defend themselves. We fight to the death because we remember what happens to species that surrender. The Velthari would not have exterminated you. We do not destroy species. We absorb them. We know. But absorption means losing ourselves. Our history, our culture, our way of doing things. We would become part of your concord, following your rules, serving your purposes. Okonkwo shook her head. We cannot accept that. We would rather die free than live as servants. Nethys was silent for a long moment. She thought about the Hall of Eternal Victory, about the conquered species whose cultures had been absorbed into the Concord. They lived in peace now. They prospered under Velthari protection. But they had lost something. Their independence, their identity, their ability to choose their own path. I understand, she said finally. But I must ask you something else. If we leave you alone, truly leave you alone, what then? Will you expand into conquered space? Will you attack our worlds? Admiral Chen laughed. It was a surprising sound, warm and genuine. Supreme Admiral, we have 30 colonized worlds. The galaxy has billions of stars. Why would we attack you when there is so much empty space to fill? Because you are aggressive. Because you evolved for war. Because it is in your nature. Our nature is to survive. War is just a tool we use when we must. Chen leaned forward. Here is something your analysts probably did not tell you. In the last 50 years, humans have not fought a single war among ourselves. Not one. We finally achieved the peace that always escaped us. How? By finding something bigger to fight. When we discovered we were not alone in the universe, we stopped fighting each other. We finally had a reason to unite. Chen smiled. Your invasion fleet actually helped. Nothing brings humans together like an external threat. Nethys felt something shift in her understanding. She had thought humans were primitive warmongers, unable to control their violent impulses. But they were not. They were survivors who had learned to channel their aggression toward outside threats. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. What would it take? Nethys asked slowly. For humanity to be our ally. The human officials exchanged glances again. This time it was Okonkwo who spoke. Respect. Not submission, not tribute, not membership in a hierarchy that puts us below you. A true alliance of equals. We fight alongside you, not for you. The Concord does not have alliances of equals. Then perhaps the Concord needs to change. Nethys thought about her people's history. 3,000 years of dominance. 3,000 years of absolute military supremacy. It had made them powerful, but it had also made them arrogant. They had forgotten that other species might have value beyond their usefulness as subjects. If we formed such an alliance, Nethys said, what would humanity offer in return? Chen answered immediately. We would teach you how to fight like we do. Not the mathematics of fleet positioning, but the psychology of war. How to break an enemy's will. How to survive defeats and come back stronger. How to make victory so costly that enemies choose peace instead. And why would we need such knowledge? We have not lost a war in 3,000 years. You lost one last month. Chen's voice was not cruel, just matter of fact. And there are threats in the galaxy that your mathematics cannot defeat. The silence, for example. Nethys felt cold. The silence was a machine intelligence that had been consuming systems on the far edge of the galaxy for centuries. The Conquered had sent fleets against it. The fleets had not returned. You know about the silence? We know it destroys everything it encounters. We know it does not negotiate. We know it will eventually reach conquered space. Chen's eyes were hard now. When it does, you will need allies who know how to fight enemies that cannot be reasoned with. Allies who have been fighting such enemies for 300,000 years. The room was silent. Nethys looked at the humans around the table. They were so strange, so different from any species she had encountered. Soft bodies and short lives, primitive technology and divided societies. But behind their eyes was something ancient and terrible. The memory of countless wars, the knowledge of how to survive anything. I will bring your proposal to the High Council, Nethys said. I cannot promise they will accept. We understand. Okonkwo stood and extended her hand again. But Supreme Admiral, whatever your council decides, remember what you learned here today. We are not your enemies unless you make us your enemies. We would rather be your friends. Nethys took the hand. I hope we can be friends. I truly do. As she left Earth, watching the blue planet shrink behind her, Nethys thought about what kind of galaxy it could be if humans and Velthari worked together. The mathematics of Velthari warfare combined with the psychology of human warfare. The precision of 3,000 years of military science combined with the adaptability of 300,000 years of survival. It would be something new, something powerful, something that might even stop the silence. She began planning what she would say to the High Council. It would not be easy to convince them. They were proud, set in their ways, certain of their own superiority. But Nethys had seen human history. She had seen what happened to proud civilizations that refused to adapt. They did not survive. And survival, she was beginning to understand, was the only mathematics that truly mattered. 10 years had passed since the Battle of the Kepler Boundary. 10 years since the Velthari Dominion had suffered its first defeat in 3,000 years. 10 years since Supreme Admiral Nethys had traveled to Earth and returned with an impossible proposal. The galaxy had changed. Ambassador Kethvoran, now old and silver-skinned with age, stood on the observation deck of the space station Unity. The station orbited a neutral world halfway between Velthari and human space, built jointly by both species as a symbol of their alliance. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from dozens of civilizations passing by. Velthari cruisers with their elegant curves, human warships with their brutal efficiency, and newer designs, hybrid vessels that combined the best of both. The alliance had not been easy to build. The Velthari High Council had argued for months about Nethys's proposal. Many admirals had called for renewed war, demanding revenge for the humiliation at Kepler. But Nethys had shown them the data about the silence. She had shown them projections of what would happen when that machine intelligence reached Concord space. She had shown them that survival required adaptation. In the end, survival won. It always did. The first human military advisors had arrived at Velthari training academies 5 years ago. Kethvoran remembered the confusion and anger of the young Velthari officers, forced to learn from members of a species they had dismissed as primitives. The lessons had been difficult. Humans did not teach the way Velthari taught. They did not lecture about mathematics and optimal positioning. They ran simulations where students lost repeatedly until they learned to adapt. They told stories about ancient battles on Earth, about generals who had won by breaking every rule. The Velthari students had struggled at first. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that war could be reduced to equations. But slowly, painfully, they had begun to understand. War was not just mathematics. It was psychology. It was will. It was the ability to take a defeat and turn it into a future victory. Admiral Chen had visited the academy several times. Kethvoran had watched her speak to the students, telling them about human history, about a city called Stalingrad where humans had fought for every street, every building, every room, rather than surrender, about an island called Britain that had stood alone against an enemy that seemed unbeatable, about a small force of soldiers at a place called Thermopylae who had died to delay an invasion, knowing their sacrifice would save their civilization. The Velthari students had not understood at first. Why would soldiers choose death when retreat was possible? Why would a city refuse to surrender when surrender meant survival? Why would anyone die for a piece of ground that had no strategic value? Because symbols matter, Chen had told them. Because sometimes the most important victory is showing your enemy that you will never give up, that you will fight on the beaches, fight on the landing grounds, fight in the fields and in the streets, that you will never surrender. She had paused then, looking out at the young Velthari officers. Your mathematics told you that you would defeat us at Kepler, and you were right. By every logical calculation, you should have won. But we did not fight according to your calculations. We fought according to ours, and our calculations included something yours did not. What? A student had asked. The will to win. The absolute refusal to accept defeat. The knowledge that as long as one of us was still fighting, we had not lost. Chen had smiled. You can calculate ship positions and weapon ranges, but you cannot calculate the human heart. Kethvoran thought about that lesson now as he watched the ships pass by the station. The Velthari had learned much from the humans. They had learned to build ships with redundant systems. They had learned to train crews for survival instead of just efficiency. They had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who had nothing left to lose. But humans had learned from the Velthari too. Human ships now carried Velthari shield technology. Human tacticians studied Velthari fleet mathematics. Human commanders had learned that sometimes elegant precision could accomplish what brute determination could not. Together, they had become something new, something stronger than either species alone. And then the silence had come. The machine intelligence had reached Concord space 3 years ago. It moved slowly but inevitably, consuming every world in its path. Conventional fleets sent against it were destroyed. Negotiation was impossible. The silence had no interest in communication. It simply expanded, absorbing resources and building more of itself. The first combined human Velthari fleet had met the silence at a system called Torch. Kethvoran remembered watching the battle reports, his 2 hearts pounding with fear. The silence had defeated every force sent against it. What could one fleet do against an enemy that had devoured 100 worlds? But this fleet was different. The Velthari ships had formed their perfect mathematical formations, their weapons synchronized, their tactics optimized. But when the Silence adapted to those tactics, when its machines learned the patterns and began to counter them, the human ships had done what they did best. They had improvised. Human destroyers had broken formation and attacked from unexpected angles. Human crews had overloaded their own engines to ram Silence vessels when weapons failed. Human commanders had made decisions that no Velthari computer would ever have suggested, sacrificing ships to create openings, trading lives for time, fighting with a ferocity that the machines could not calculate or predict. The battle had lasted 3 days. When it was over, the combined fleet had lost 40% of its ships, but the Silence advance had been stopped. For the first time in its existence, the machine intelligence had been forced to retreat. News of the victory had spread across the galaxy. Other species that had been preparing to flee before the Silence, began to hope again. They asked to join the Alliance. They offered ships, resources, soldiers. The conquered began to transform from a hierarchy of conquered peoples into a true federation of free civilizations. Keth Voran smiled at the memory. He had lived 400 years, served the Dominion through countless crises, watched civilizations rise and fall, but he had never expected to see the Velthari change so fundamentally, to accept equals, to learn from those they had once dismissed as primitives, to become part of something larger than themselves. The door behind him opened, and Supreme Admiral Nethys entered the observation deck. She was older now, too, her silver skin darker with age, but her eyes were still sharp. "Ambassador," she said, "I thought I would find you here, watching the ships." Keth Voran replied, "I never tire of it. Every vessel that passes represents a civilization that chose to join us, not because we conquered them, but because they wanted to be part of what we are building." Nethys joined him at the window. "I received a message from Admiral Chen. The second campaign against the Silence begins next month. She requested that I command the Velthari contingent personally. Will you?" "Yes. This may be my last battle. I want it to matter." They stood in silence for a moment, watching a human carrier pass by, its hull decorated with symbols from a dozen Earth cultures. "Do you remember what you said to me 10 years ago?" Keth Voran asked. "When you came back from Earth and proposed the Alliance?" "I said many things. You said that the humans had taught you something about survival, that it was not about winning every battle. It was about never stopping, never giving up, never accepting that defeat was final." Nethys nodded slowly. "I remember. The humans have a phrase for it. They say that it is not over until it is over." "What does that mean?" "It means that as long as you are still fighting, you have not lost. The only true defeat is surrender." She turned to face him. "We mastered war for 3,000 years, Keth Voran. We made it into a science, a mathematics, an art form. But we forgot the most important truth about war." "What truth?" "That it is not about ships or weapons or tactics. It is about will. The side that wants to win more. The side that refuses to accept defeat. The side that will pay any price for victory, that side wins. Always." Eventually, Keth Voran thought about the humans he had come to know over the past decade. Admiral Chen with her quiet intensity, Secretary General Okonkwo with her patient wisdom, the human soldiers and officers who served alongside Velthari, teaching and learning, fighting and dying. "They are remarkable creatures," he said. "They are survivors, the most dangerous kind of survivors, the kind that remember everything and forget nothing, the kind that turn their scars into armor and their defeats into lessons." Nethys looked out at the passing ships. "We thought we were the masters of war. We thought our mathematics made us invincible. But mathematics cannot calculate the human heart. It cannot predict what a species will do when it has been fighting for survival since the first of its kind climbed down from the trees." A new ship appeared through the window. It was a hybrid design, half Velthari elegance and half human brutality. The name on its hull was written in both languages. "Unity. We claimed mastery of battle," Keth Voran said quietly. And then a human warship appeared. "Yes." Nethys watched the Unity pass by, heading out toward the front lines where the Silence waited. "And we learned that there are some things you cannot master, some things you can only survive." The ship disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying its crew of humans and Velthari toward an enemy that could not be reasoned with or calculated. They would fight together, die together, win or lose together, and whatever happened, they would never surrender. They would never stop fighting. They would remember, because that was what survivors did. That was what humans had taught the galaxy, and it was the most important lesson of all.